Hello, brothers and sisters. How are you doing? I'm hoping that you are doing great. I want to talk about a given concept. That's the white Christian nationalism. I think at this point, majority of you know that one of the biggest problems that the United States is having is white Christian nationalism. And this is because of the policies that they have chosen to push, the policies that white Christian nationalism pushes towards America. All these policies runs the United States in a wrong way. And this is what Mr. Donald Trump is using. This is what Mr. Donald Trump is using to run the United States. Hey, probably some of you are asking themselves, what is white Christian nationalism? White Christian nationalism is an ideology, is a political ideology that combines elements of Christianity with the belief that the United States was founded and should remain a distinct Christian nation, often with an implicit or explicit emphasis on white cultural dominance. It is not the same thing as Christianity itself, nor does it represent all white Americans, but rather it is a specific political ideology and cultural movement that blends religion, nation identity, and race into a single framework. The reason as to why I'm saying why Christian nationalism has been a problem, it's because you understand the devastating effects that this has led to other groups of people. This includes Black Americans, this includes immigrants, this includes all these other group of people. While Black Americans have an history with white Christian nationalism. When you talk about the KKK, when you talk about how they use the Bible to enslave Black people. But hey, I'm not going into that. But white Christian nationalism has caused a big problem even in the 21st century when you talk about the United States. Now, there's a video that I found by a gentleman called Dark Matter 2525. Kindly go check him out. He offers good content. But I want you to listen to this, what he says, because this is so much important. Brothers and sisters, let's watch this video. I'm gonna be back and then I'll be sharing my thoughts in regards to this. And kindly watch the video keenly and then I'll be back. I'll be breaking down everything that he says. And I think it's imperative for us to watch this video and then I'll be back.
Christian nationalists, white supremacists, and the far right in general do have a lot of influence in my country, the United States. Not necessarily because they're very numerous, but they do weasel their way into places of great power. And that is very dangerous. I'll show you why. You see, they sort of merged into a coalition, and they often share and repeat two slogans that I want you to consider. Slogan number one, import the third world, become the third world. And slogan number two, socialism or communism has failed everywhere it has been tried. The reason I want to point out those two slogans is because of the enormity of their irony. You see, the Christian nationalist, white supremacist, far-right amalgamation promote the very policies and ideals most commonly found in the third world. And it's those ideas that have failed all throughout history and all around the world. So both of those slogans perfectly apply to themselves. In other words, they fear the very thing that they themselves would turn the United States into, the third world. Before I get into this, let me give you a bit of a disclaimer. I'm going to be talking about the third world in negative terms and referring to it as the third world. But there's a couple of problems with that. First, it's an outdated and inaccurate term derived to describe countries unaffiliated with Cold War superpowers. But now it's mostly used just to mean poor countries. But since it's the term the Christian Nationalist Coalition uses in their arguments, I'm going to use it also just for purposes of clarity. Today, it's more accurately called the developing world. And just know that I'm not referring to all the people of the developing world as if they all agree with those who rule over them or agree with those who influenced the direction of their societies. Just like much of the population of the United States doesn't agree with our current governance, so too does much of the developing world disagree with those who rule over them. Such people have sent me very kind messages from those countries where they have to hide who they are. And that's what happens when your government is taken over by religious authoritarian zealots. They oppress people. Now on to the rest of the video. Why would the Christian Nationalist Coalition be against immigration from the very places that already have the policies they support? Because people from those places are the wrong race. Because not only do they want the policies of the third world, but they also want the homogeneity of it. They're explicit about that. They say things like, why do all the other races get to have their own countries, but not white people?
Well, just on principle, like every other group in the world has the right to its own homeland except white people? Like what?
In other words, they're jealous of other countries that they see as inferior. There's some cognitive dissonance going on there.
What country has ever grown stronger the more divided it's been?
None, but I'm not saying that
that's
we
the point.
have to get more divided.
No, but diversity definitionally will divide you.
He's using equivocation to hide the fact that he supports division. Division of the races. Division means separated, as in segregation. That's not what diversity is. Diversity is variety, but together. So to answer his question without the dishonest equivocation, the United States is the most diverse country, and they say that the United States is the greatest country on earth. Yet they also want to fundamentally alter it so that it's more in line with countries that they dislike the most. In other words, racially homogeneous. The reason they don't see that as a problem is because they think it's more about the people than the policy, hence the racism. But my question is, why would they want to adopt the policies and ideals of groups they consider to be inferior? In other words, why would they believe that inferior people implement superior ideas? And if the ideas they implement really are superior, then how are you defining their inferiority? Let me show you a rather straightforward example that represents a very common sentiment among those I'm talking about. This person says, quote, "The Democrats are buddying up with Islam, so let's go ahead and take the top issues liberals care about and see how this partnership is going to go. No abortion rights, no transgender/gay rights, no diversity, equity, and inclusion, no religious freedom, no women's rights, no protecting children, no basic human rights. This partnership is going to take us all down because liberals don't understand this." I'm sure she thought she cooked with that one, but do you see where she made her rather large mistake? In the act of trying to demonize Muslims and scare liberals, by listing all the good things she thinks Muslims don't support, she inadvertently also made a list of good things Republicans don't support either. She says, this partnership is going to take us all down. But she herself has tweets railing against abortion rights, railing against trans people, and railing against diversity, equity, and inclusion. Rather than display a Muslim and liberal alliance in her tweet, what she accidentally did is really showcase how similar Christian extremists are to Islamic extremists. Yes, they're different religions, but they're both Abrahamic, and their extremists share the exact same values. What she doesn't understand is that Democrats stand up for Muslims in the United States because they are often discriminated against as an extreme minority in the United States. That's a totally different dynamic than in countries run by Islamic extremists, who you will not typically find being supported by Democrats. You'll find them shaking hands with Donald Trump. You'll find your president selling our most advanced stealth fighter jets to the actual people who did 9/11 and who also happen to have China as their top trading partner, while clueless conservatives on Twitter fearmonger over a moderate Muslim who supports LGBT rights becoming the mayor of New York. They even go so far as to post memes that say New Yorkers forgot 9/11, as if people like Mamdani did 9/11, rather than the people being invited into the White House right now. So a distinction needs to be made. Just like there are moderate Christians who are good people and who do not want to infringe upon our rights, so too are there moderate Muslims who are good people and who do not want to infringe upon our rights. I've met some of them. I know they exist. Since Christian nationalists have far more power in the United States, standing up for the Muslim minority will be far less likely to result in the loss of the rights on that list than it would be to align with the far more powerful Christian nationalist coalition, who would be far more likely and able to destroy the rights on that list. While she meant to target liberals and Muslims, she just gave us a very compelling list of reasons to resist the rise of Christian nationalism in America, which is functionally no different than what an Islamic extremist government would do. The only reason we're not there yet is because we're still resisting them, so we can't give up. And that includes moderate and liberal Christians who should be very motivated to not allow their religion to become something totally rooted in hatred. If you think it's ridiculous for me to compare Christian nationalists to Islamic extremists, then you really need to start paying attention. You are afforded the luxury of questioning my comparison simply because the Christian nationalists have not yet accomplished all of their clearly stated goals. Do you really want to give them a chance to do that? Tweets like this aren't coming from people warning you against it. No, this is a pastor, and he's telling you out loud what their goals are. Listen to them. Let's look at some maps to illustrate what I'm talking about. This is gender equality by country. Christian nationalists, white supremacists, and the far right in general constantly try to sell the idea that gender equality is either unnatural, ungodly, or just plain undesirable, and promoted by sinister Jews and or Marxists trying to destroy the family unit so that they can conquer our nation from within. So, their ideal is to be against gender equality and for our nation to be patriarchal. They want to repeal the 19th Amendment and put men in complete control of the government. Well, we see that their ideal is most commonly practiced in the third world. However, in the very places they claim liberals want the U.S. to become. They want us to change, to be more like they are, in all but race. Third world nations are largely against gender equality. The Islamic extremists are against gender equality, and so too are our very own Christian nationalists, all peas in a pod. This map shows the Women, Peace, and Security Index. So you see, everywhere women do not have gender equality, they also have less peace and security. The Christian Nationalist Coalition will try to get you to believe it's the opposite, that if women will just submit to them, that they will provide the women with security. In practice, that's not how it works out. Under Christian nationalist rule, the dark areas of this map would spread. Women would be subjugated once again. The Christian nationalists would not see it as subjugation, however, but merely as putting women in their rightful natural place as ordained by God, a place which they claim women either outright desire or deep down secretly desire, no matter what they outwardly profess. And disregarding what women profess is very consistent with their other feelings on women having agency over their own lives and bodies. In other words, they don't care what women say or feel. Just like the Islamic extremists, the Christian nationalists want the women's place to be one of subservience, in which the man would have ultimate control over the finances, the household, what women should wear, and even over sexual intercourse, whether it be just for pleasure or reproduction. She wouldn't really have a say. In regard to intercourse, she would essentially be reduced to a masturbatory device and a broodmare to be available whenever her husband demands. Her duty would be to submit, and that duty would be justified by the full authority of the creator of the universe, as dictated by ancient patriarchs who died thousands of years ago and who also wanted total control over women. Once they consider the woman old and used up, she becomes nothing more than a babysitter, a cook, and a housekeeper, often resulting in the husband having extramarital affairs, again justified by his nature and excused by God's divine forgiveness. So once again, in the subjugation of women, the Christian nationalists would perfectly align with Islamic extremists. Being persuaded by such people who basically treat women as property or like a carton of milk with an expiration date will make you very unattractive to most women and will likely cause you to become an incel or divorced. Perhaps that's why Christian nationalists also want to end women's ability to divorce as well.
Will they divorce, or do you want them to keep going in the relationship?
Keep going. You can't divorce. I mean, that's not a real thing. You can like separate. See, his Catholic background shines through. He knows. You can't divorce. You can separate, but you can't actually divorce. That's not a real thing.
Even though it might be like physically abusive.
You got to endure. People are too.
You want to stay.
Gee, I wonder where else in the world women can't get divorced on the same terms as men. Oh wait, we don't have to wonder, do we? Here they are, as shown on this map. The awful religious extremist countries, once again, show us the template of what the Christian nationalists would do to the United States if given enough power. This map shows where abortion is outlawed or restricted to various degrees around the world. Again, we see that it is yet another policy idea that is most prevalent in the third world. That obviously has a lot to do with the lack of women's rights in those places, and the idea that gender equality is a bad thing. This is another policy in countries they fear and call inferior, yet want to adopt in their home country, which they consider superior. Christian nationalists are very much against homosexuality and the LGBT community in general. One of their goals would be to ban it altogether, to make it illegal as ordained by what they believe to be the creator of the universe. This map shows where in the world it is currently illegal to be gay, punishable by prison or even death. Now, as you can see, this is also a third world phenomenon. Another case of looking to inferior countries for policies to adopt into the superior country so that it can more closely resemble the inferior countries. It doesn't make sense from a logical standpoint until you realize that their real motive is based purely on bigotry against people and not the actual results of bad policies and ideals that make a nation a much worse place to be. Their emotional attachment to their own bigoted ideals overrides the easily observable empirical reality of what actually makes a nation a worse place to live. In other words, these are emotionally driven people, not evidence-based people. Yet they will try to get you to believe that it's the exact opposite. This map shows the countries where people are the most religious, and our recurring theme holds true. The darker the blue, the more people consider religion to be important. Christian nationalists would want the United States to be very dark blue, just like the Third World, Northern Africa, and the Middle East, the places they fear the most. And of course, it's no coincidence that those are the places much more likely to discriminate based on their religious beliefs, just like the Christian nationalists would if they could. For example, here is a map of where atheists are persecuted the most. The darkest of areas are where atheism is punishable by death. And as you can see, one of those countries is Saudi Arabia, which warmly welcomes Trump and who Trump warmly welcomes in return. Like the Third World and like Islamic extremists, Christian nationalists also hate and would want to restrict or even kill atheists, which would result in the United States more closely resembling the Third World or Islamic extremist countries. Once again, that aligns with this map, which shows where there is more or less freedom of expression and humanist values. Again, Christian nationalists would happily restrict both. And again, it would cause the United States to more closely resemble countries they call inferior. Speaking of using the government to impose or enforce your religion, Benjamin Franklin said that if your religion needs to call upon the powers of the government to support it, then it's a sign of it being a bad religion. And just as you'd expect, places with such bad policies and ideals are also the worst in terms of education, as this map shows. Not coincidentally, the Christian nationalists want to eliminate the liberal institutions that hardly exist in the Third World, like social welfare programs. They would eliminate the Department of Education and advocate for homeschooling as if all parents are even remotely qualified to do such a thing. But they believe that would stifle the attempts of the liberals and leftists from indoctrinating their children. But it's obviously the opposite, and it's they who wish to indoctrinate children, which is why they try to target them with their religion as early as possible. One of the fatal flaws that could end up being part of their undoing is that they don't believe in certain facts, so they label those facts as leftist, which is why when those facts are taught to their children, they mistakenly see it as leftist indoctrination. Obviously, you're going to have some pretty big problems when you label reality itself a political enemy, because reality is a hell of a thing to try to resist. In the end, reality always wins. So if you call it a political enemy, you're putting yourself at a great disadvantage. Vaccines aren't leftist. Evolution is not leftist. Climate change is not leftist. It's just reality, and you will be affected by reality whether or not you think it's leftist. Let's look at happiness rankings of the world. As you can see, happiness is lowest where people have the least amount of freedom and where the policies and ideals of the Christian nationalists are actually implemented. And of course, the garbage policies and ideals of the Third World are perfectly replicated as a microcosm in the United States itself, and all of the individual states that more closely lean toward the policies and ideals of the Third World. Let's take a look. Here's happiness rankings by state. Red and orange are the least happy, while blue and green are the most. Any clue as to why the southeastern United States is the least happy? Perhaps we can learn something about it by looking at the rest of the metrics we looked at for the Third World. Here's public school rankings by state. It's much worse in the southern United States and much better in the Northeast and the Northwest, which is much more liberal. This is mirrored on the next map, which separates the states based on how religious they are. The more educated you are, the less religious you tend to be. Now, before you chalk that up to Democrat indoctrination, remember that the trend holds true not only in the United States, but also around the world. Part of that is a result of perceiving objective facts as belonging to your political enemy, thus leading to the rejection of objective facts and a disadvantage in terms of education, which then leads to all sorts of other disadvantages. The Christian Nationalist Coalition commits self-harm, and they handicap their own children, thinking that they're helping them. This map shows states by rights for women, or legal protections for women. And as you can see, we have a lot of the same culprits that we see for higher religion and lower education. The southeastern United States being the worst, once again. It turns out that the more ignorant you are, and the more religious you are, the more likely you are to oppress women. The worldwide maps clearly show that, so why wouldn't that be the case in the United States as well? As it is. And this map shows when gay marriage was legalized in each state. The green was early on, the red was later, and the black had to be forced by the Supreme Court. Again and again, we see the states that most closely emulate the third world among the states are consistently in the southeastern United States, aka the Bible Belt. That holds true for violent crime as well. These states have the lowest violent crime rates. As you can see, the 5 least violent states in the United States are all blue states. Now, these states have the highest violent crime rates. And as you can see, of the 5 most violent states, 4 of them are red states. Now, of course, the nationalists like to blame that on blue cities within the red states, but there's a few problems with that. First, the less violent blue states also have blue cities. Second, cities have higher crime regardless of political affiliation because of population density. More interaction equates to more transgression. And blue cities are still subject to red state law and red state governance. So let's look at a map of the United States that shows the homicide rate by county. Looks very consistent with all of our other third world metrics, doesn't it? Yet this is not the map a Christian nationalist would imagine, because they are trained by propaganda to see certain facts as leftist, so they reject those facts to their own disadvantage. According to them, the absence of God is what causes so much violence. Yet if you want to find where it's the most violent in the United States and around the world, you simply have to go to where it's the most religious, the least educated, and the most socially repressed. But those facts sound way too leftist, so they reject those facts. That means this huge problem in the southern United States doesn't get solved because they don't think the problem exists. Trump sends the troops up to Minnesota because he says that's where the big problem is, even though it's among the least violent states. And he ignores this massive festering wound that is the Bible Belt because they voted for him. And the state governments of the South support him, so he wants their style of governance to spread. Results be damned, because all that truly matters to them is power, not lives, not education, not affordability, not happiness, not freedom, not facts, not even crime, but power. And when the negative results of their policies and ideals manifest, they blame those negative results on all the usual scapegoats, anyone but themselves. And that results in even more hatred toward the scapegoats, and thus the problem gets even worse.
I love the poorly educated. Smart people don't like me, you know?
What about protecting children? Doesn't the Christian Nationalist Coalition care about children? No, not really. They use children to sell the idea of the family as a way to preserve their ideals. In other words, children are seen as a means to an end, a mere tool, rather than vulnerable human beings who should be cared for, nourished, and loved. There's a reason they don't care about Donald Trump's obvious involvement with Epstein. There's a reason they don't care that he cheated on all of his wives. There's a reason they didn't care about children losing their food benefits during the government shutdown. There's a reason they don't care about the tens of thousands of children who were killed in Gaza. There's a reason they explicitly wanted DOGE to cut benefits for children who have died because of it. And it's not because they care about children. It's because children are how they create more soldiers for their causes. So if it's children from families they see as the enemy, well, then those kids can die for all they care. But what about the way the Islamic extremists see children? Don't they allow their old men to have sexual relations with girls way too young for them? Yeah, and that's terrible. Now compare the religions. The Islamic extremist rationale for having sex with young girls is the same as it is for the Christian extremist.
If that's what men are providing, if that's what they're bringing to the table, love through protection and provision, that takes time. If what women are providing is beauty as well as procreation, right? So giving to her husband children that will bear his name. And then also you could also argue submission from the scripture. I think of Ephesians chapter 5, wives, submit to your husbands in everything as the church submits to Christ. Well, when you think of that for a wife, time is actually not on her side. Fertility declines with age. Beauty, right? The Proverbs also say beauty, charm is deceitful and beauty is fleeting. So the beauty is fading. That's what the scripture says. Beauty fades, the physical beauty. The fertility is decreasing. And also, because we live in a secular society, the longer that she is living, the more years she racks up without coming under the headship of a husband, but having already left the headship of her father, she is building up a longer and longer tenure of a headless life.
Right.
She is declining in beauty, declining in fertility, and only really increasing in one thing, which would be insubordination.
Religious zealotry of the Abrahamic religions all lead to the same place. Men using authoritarianism to impose their will and claiming that it's ordained by God. The resulting loss of freedom always results in a much worse society. They're pointing beyond the United States in both time and geography to find examples of how to do it better. But how can that be possible if the United States is already the greatest of all? And how can that be possible when all of their examples resulted in objectively worse conditions? They often try to rationalize away the fact that they want to adopt the policies and ideals of the third world by saying that the main variable that causes different results is race. The problem with that way of thinking, besides the obvious, is that not only have the Christian Nationalist Coalition's ideals been tried all around the world, but also all throughout history as well. And the results throughout history, regardless of race, are just as disastrous. Yet that doesn't stop them from appealing to the past, because they've been indoctrinated to believe that the past was better. And they think we're in a fallen state. And they describe our society as being infested by degeneracy and immorality. They often appeal to the United States before the 1950s as being sort of an ideal society. But those were dark times, and they were made dark times by people who thought exactly as they do. Look at the suicide rate. Look at the homicide rate. The revisionists who do not appeal to the pre-1950s era as a more peaceful time are usually Gen Xers like myself who naively point to the 80s and 90s as being more peaceful because they have nostalgia and survivorship bias. But the truth is that the 80s and 90s were a significantly more violent period. People weren't happier back then. But if the nationalists have their way, then maybe it will end up being a better period than the near future. We're certainly already on our way back down because of their leadership. Things are getting harder because we're not learning that these people do not have our best interests at heart. The propagandists post these smiling white families posing for a picture, and they say things like, "This is what they took from you," which makes me shake my head because it's usually the ideals of the people who post that shit who took the American dream from you. They lean into the greed and corruption that made housing unaffordable. So now you can't buy a house. They lean into the idea that women have a certain role to play and that they owe you something. So, if you listen to them, now you're repulsive to women. I easily found the family life that many of them cannot. I was fortunate enough to buy a house in the early 2000s before prices skyrocketed, and I've been with my wife for 30 years now. I certainly did not accomplish that by listening to them or people like them. I did it by sincerely caring and being unselfish. For that, I've been called a simp by incels. But that's the opposite of a simp. Simps are selfish. I have what they want because I was not seeking it for my own selfish desires the way they would. Women can tell when you have selfish desires. Your desires display red flags. That family man lifestyle simply found me because of the way I am, not because I outwardly tried to achieve it. But you know why they find those memes convincing and why they think something has been taken from them? Because no matter how they look on the outside, they're repulsive on the inside, which is much more difficult to fix. And repulsive people have a disadvantage when it comes to finding a spouse and starting a family, at least a happy family. And that's because their contempt and hatred doesn't stay on the inside. It lashes out. So they think an evil, nebulous they took the family life from them. They don't introspect. They don't consider that maybe it's their own fault. No, it's the rest of society that's the problem. No, it's an entire gender that's the problem. It can't possibly be.
Hello brothers and sisters, welcome back to the channel. I'm hoping that you are doing great from wherever you're watching us from. Now, from what you've heard, look at the policies. Look at how these people look at factors that really affect the citizens of the United States. The laws that are being pushed. And you see how they are problematic. They're not progressive when it comes to development, when it comes to how people view life and everything. You understand that it has been one of the major problems. And one thing that I like about Dark Matter is like he addresses all these issues and trying to link them or liken them to contemporary issues that have been going on for the longest time. Charlie Kirk, rest in peace. But you're a perfect example of white Christian nationalism. And they used you to push all these agendas when you were trying to talk about this thing. However, you later on learned that what you were doing was wrong and somehow, somewhere, it caught up with you. But hey, this is what is happening. When scholars analyze white nationalist movements in the United States, They are generally referring to ideologies that advocate for a racially redefined national identity, and seek to preserve political and cultural dominance for people of European descent. Now, these movements differ in structure and intensity, but they share a belief that demographic and cultural change represents a threat. Researchers across political science, sociology, and history have examined how policies influenced by such ideas, whether explicit or directly, can affect democratic institutions, social cohesion, and economic opportunities, and America's global standing. Now, just from that explanation, you get to understand that these groups, or people with these policies, they have a given fear. They have a given fear that one day they will be taken away, that they will be wiped away, like wiped away when it comes to population, wiped away when it comes to economically. And that's why we are seeing a big fight towards immigrants. That's why we are seeing a big fight towards immigrants, because they have a belief that they will be wiped out. And I'm going to be taking you back to history, right? The weather is good. I'm going to be taking you back to history. And I'm here to remind you that, remember, it is because of the same fear. That's why they sabotaged what black people had, what good black people had that was good to them. This is part of history that people don't say. What happened during the Tulsa, Oklahoma? Because it is these people with these same ideologies of fear that their white supremacy will be taken away from them. That's why they decided to sabotage all these things, all these great things that black people had. Let's talk about black farmers. Let's talk about every great thing that black people have done. Black banks, black economic markets, they destabilized all these things because of their policies. So these policies are made out of fear, a fear that one day good things that happen to other groups of people will make them look less important or less great. And that's what Mr. Donald Trump is trying to do. Trump and white nationalist Christianity, it is something that needs to be like checked keenly. The people that claim themselves that they are righteous, or the nationalists, you see what they're associated with. Let's talk about the Epstein files. What just recently happened? What just recently we are seeing? Yes, these are the same policies that these people stand for. This is what these people support. This is what these people look up to, because that's just what they are. Now, one major area of concern involves democratic norms and equal protection under the law. Policies rooted in exclusionary nationalism often seek to restrict voting access, redefine citizenship, boundaries, or concentrate power in ways that disproportionately affect minority communities. Now, critics argue that when legislation is framed around preserving racial hierarchy, it undermines the foundational American principles of equal citizenship, and over time, this can erode trust in institutions, particularly among communities that feel targeted or marginalized. And this is true, right? So historically, exclusionary ideologies have influenced immigration policies. Laws that favor certain racial or ethnic groups while restricting others have shaped American demographics and opportunity structure. While the United States has long debated immigration levels and border control, white nationalist framing often emphasizes cultural replacement of racial threat narratives. I've talked about fear, right? Now, social scientists note that when immigration debates are racialized, it can increase hate crimes, discrimination, community polarization, even beyond direct legal impact of policy changes. Another thing that I'm saying is that education policy that they have is another sphere where exclusionary movements can have long-lasting effects. Now, efforts to limit the teaching of systemic racism, civil rights history, or multicultural perspectives may reshape how future generations understand their past. Critics argue that minimizing historical injustices can hinder reconciliation and civic understanding. When educational frameworks become tools for preserving a singular narrative, they may discourage critical thinking and diminishing the inclusion of diverse perspectives in public discussion. And I told you, and I'm still saying that this group of people, they interfered with black people because of fear. Mr. Donald Trump went ahead and burned down black libraries that teaches black history. Why do you think there is a big fight towards black history? It is because they want to have a single story. And it is a single story of lies. Trump has the Eden of lies. Because tell me why. You will sabotage a group of people because you fear. And these are the policies of white Christian nationalism. We talk about the KKK and what they did to black people. So when you understand all these things and how they come to build up, it makes you understand that the policies that they set, they are based on fear that they don't want other people to come and have what they have. And that's the fear that they have. That's the fear that they are always trying to reflect. So I hope you understand that. Criminal justice policies influenced by racialized narratives have also drawn scrutiny. Tough on crime frameworks historically intersected with racial stereotypes, contributing to mass incarceration patterns that disproportionately affect Black and Latino communities, while criminal justice reform debates are complex and bipartisan. So many scholars have found out that policies shaped by racial fear or scapegoating can produce long-term social and economic harm, including family disruption and reduced labor market participation. Now, the economic consequences are also significant. Exclusionary nationalism can lead to policies that restrict labor mobility, limit diversity initiatives, or create trade tensions grounded in identity politics rather than economic strategy. Economists often emphasize that diverse workforce drive innovation and productivity. When policies discourage inclusion or foster social instability, they can deter investment, reduce entrepreneurship in marginalized communities, and contribute to economic inefficiencies that affect the entire country. Public health outcomes may also be indirectly influenced. Research shows that discrimination and social exclusions are linked to stress-related health disparities. When racialized rhetoric becomes normalized in political spaces, it can contribute to hostile environments that discourage marginalized groups for seeking services or trusting institutions. Public health scholars argue that the inclusive governance improves overall societal well-being, while exclusionary policies tend to widen disparities. So there is so much and so many things that I've delved in, but I hope the few things that I've touched on really help to see what I've said. And guys, go check out Dark Matter 2525. He really shares a good content. I'm hoping to see you on my next video. But until then, peace, love, and harmony. Salute.